Okay, now we are recording. Any other questions about the discussion response? Victoria, I had Aiden who asked me last night. Aiden, you good? You're good. All right. And I know let's get to share screen, excuse me. All right. And I'm about ready to disappear, I guess. I don't know. All right, so this one of my one of these days I don't do too much as far as slides. Okay. All right, so I don't have slides that go back all from the beginning. So, but I want you guys, and this is something that I want to make sure that we always have the connection from the first week up until now. All right. To see, look, peer into your teacher's head as far as his method to the madness in regards to history, Arkansas Valley, agriculture, and labor. And really, what it is as we've always, from the very beginning, looked at this possibility, seeing the history as an area as borderlands. I really, because somebody, again, I'm hitting upon something we've already talked about several times, but I'm bringing it to you one more time to kind of refresh your memory why it is that we look at this as borderlands, or if you are very strong looking at something somewhere else, which I think that one of you took a deep dive into considerations of um, really what the Chicano studies touches upon directly in regards to literary or philosophical terms of Mike, that might have been you, the reality, Rocky Ford. Um, Something that you would probably that kind of dealt with within the field of Chicano studies. So you took a deep dive with uh, you went there. I didn't, but I'm willing to guide you. But we'll get to you're going to have to dig in a little bit on that. You might have already done so. But what is borders? Let's really quick. I know this is pretty redundant, but what is borderlands and how does Arkansas Valley fit in with that?
Well, I mean, it's a separation of different peoples and different, like there's geographical regions and then there's different cultures and different aspects of that.
Okay, who was that? Who?
Oh, Victoria.
Victoria. Okay, yeah. Anybody else? You may have to say that again because you dropped out and I was wondering who it was. Say it again, please.
Oh, sorry. So I was saying borderlands essentially are like it can represent the geographical barriers as well as the barriers between like different cultures, different languages, and social barriers such as that.
Okay. Is it fluid or static? Are we looking at what we've been looking at? Are we looking at rather linear events or just particularly those terms within those terms? What are we looking at? Go after 1848, this big gold boundary, political boundary was established. Did somebody's attitude towards themselves and how they identify and their citizenship, did they just change overnight? No, not really. Not even till this day, right? And a lot of this is probably also related to how, as you see culturally, affects their living, right? And how, like how they had their own irrigation, as we saw with Boxville. All right. What other concepts can we brought? What other situation frameworks have we brought in other than borderlands? Talked a lot about culture, right? And how that may impact their they're within agriculture and labor, right? Uh, okay. All right, let's go ahead and as we may have talked about last time, I got to get you all the way over here, I guess, so you can see my screen. We talked about the gradual towards the 20th century and how, like at Rocky Ford, the need for more water and the need for movement of that water for different types of agriculture that wasn't necessarily grown naturally, I guess you kind of speak, or indigenous to the land. Um, and it was because of other people that looked at this, looked at overall, well, who was around, like the miners, and what did the miners need, how to make money from that. And then just bringing in ideas as to like melons. And what it is with melons is not just the increased need for water, but the increased ability to also with increased water, but try to decrease the amount of cost depending on how much it will cost to compared to selling it to the consumer. And here you will see a moment here, really quick, is with melons and Rocky Ford. I'll get to that in a moment. Yeah, Rocky Ford was a unique aspect of melons, an ability to take that particular melon, the product itself, the vegetable or fruit itself, and change the aspects of the consumer or the individual human within their particular taste. This is going to be a key phrase here, and that's taste. As you saw last time with the Western diet, and it changed earlier on, sometime between the later part of the 19th century, with taste towards meat and livestock. And within that Western diet, excuse me, always itchy nose. And what was that aspect? So we talked about how the cattle and the sheep industry evolved. What aspect within the Western diet did we talk about, and what did that change get to as far as within agriculture before sugar beets? You guys hear me?
Yeah.
What was changing and what was fed?
It was like alfalfa or whatever it's called.
Yes, alfalfa. That's right. With the sheep and cattle, well, mostly cattle. All right, you see how the change is just fatten them up because the tastes were different, or just, yeah, we can get into the nitty gritty as far as fat levels, but we won't do it here. But I'm more particularly how it's connected to how I got to alfalfa. And here you'll see how the change in taste, or actual intentional change in taste with particular things like melons, was they were able to actually change the industry and as far as profit. Yeah, we don't need, and of course from alfalfa came the aspects of a Rocky Ford, then what? The swing coming in with different aspects of what can be grown as they brought in and changing of the land's purpose, right? From cattle and sheep industry, then eventually then homesteading and increased aspects of farming, all right? And of course, then leads to sugar beets. So I wanted to talk about let's go ahead and talk about Rocky Ford's melons, and mostly cantaloupe. Cantaloupe, I don't know if y'all taken a class from Professor Hernandez at all at CSU Pueblo. Okay, he's been there he's a lecturer, like, or adjunct like me, but he got his dissertation last year from the University of Arizona. He was kind enough to provide to me what he wrote in his dissertation, particularly part of it about the melons and the cantaloupe in Rocky Ford. And it really where he brought in aspect of taste, literally taste, as part of looking at history of Arkansas Valley and agriculture. All right, he talked about other aspects within Colorado as far as the census. So you really got into how different from anybody else as far as history of agriculture or history of Colorado and industry. For example, part of his dissertation was on Pueblo and the steel mill and other industries in Pueblo, and how groups of people moved away, separated themselves from specifically the smells, the potent smells from the steel mill, to get to a point where they weren't smelling that. All right. So how history and how the change in where somebody's located and the land and urban areas changed as part of history. So here we'll look at just what he said about Rocky Ford's melons. And so looking at taste and the way of gauging the extent of growing a crop that needs water and labor. And what they did, Swink, right? We're looking at Swink, who came in and brought in aspects of a lot of stuff far as what you probably see now as far as agriculture in the Arkansas Valley, most especially sugar beets, and we'll definitely get to the point of looking at labor there connected to growing sugar beets. So I'll provide this link to his dissertation. You don't need to look at the whole thing. One chat. Well, let's go ahead and look at it now. Okay. I put this in Zotero, so it's a link there. This is actually on ProQuest. So just look at his first chapter, I think it is. Hello. Okay, yeah. Chapter 1, Tasting Rocky Ford, Developing Colorado's Cantaloupe Industry. Just look at that one. Like I said, you can gut it and try to see where he gets bringing us how they changed up the cantaloupe to people over all the world, including Europe, as far as being really tasty and how that increased the distribution of it. Just because everybody different from every other Rocky Ford seed, I guess they called it. I think, what was it called? Net. The exterior of it had to look like a net or something like that. Spider's web. So look at that if you like. Let me get back to my slides. Okay, so really, here's a weird connection. I don't know, maybe I have an ability to connect the dots. Really, he found out that the cantaloupe can grow better in alfalfa soil. And of course, alfalfa, we can see, from that, we can go back and see where that all came from, all right, from within the area. So here we have at least somewhat of connection, at least with agriculture in particular, a tangible look within in the agriculture environmental history, all right. Other factors within history, like you probably already know, culturally, socially, that I've been bringing to the table for you guys last few weeks. But I think it's important to understand, as you look at the chapter on there, as far as Professor Hernandez, is looking at how this impacted their ability to, or still need for labor, still need for water. Looking at cantaloupes as monoculture, all right, as opposed to, what is monoculture? Look at what is grown and how much work is centralized within producing a particular product or agricultural product for a consumer. It's different than from your homegrown garden, right? You're growing several different things, and not to get into nitty gritty of agriculture, or you got your garden, you're growing all sorts of things. Even though Swink brought in ideas of growing other different things, really got to the point to where cantaloupes were grown in Rocky Ford in order to centralize all the need to logistics and distribution and supply a need. So it was really demand. The demand for cantaloupe, this particular cantaloupe from Rocky Ford, was in high regard because of its taste. It seemed like it was sweet, and because of the way that the weather was and the natural environment in Rocky Ford, was able to produce this type of product that everybody loved. And so it really depends. So they build their own sort of crate in order to load it up onto the railroad cars. Of course, you have the railroad there. That was the key thing, but also bringing together particular organizations, growers associations, in order to, in lieu with the railroad, to get them all the way out to the East Coast, in the East, Chicago, for example, the restaurants there, New York, but also over to London at the time, the turn of the century. So it became to the concentration of all efforts were made for more farmers and advertising, and this area became famous for cantaloupe until this day. So I mean, they have a melon day, right, in August. So it really got to the point to where a concentration of water and labor and technology was focused on cantaloupe. Now, of course, at the same time, in different areas, you will see how within the Arkansas Valley, from Rocky Ford or even all the way out to Hawley, it was, I want you guys to look at this concept of how it affected and the need for particular type of labor. All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you're kind of cutting out a little bit, but not bad right now.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. So let me get to the slide. As you've already seen here, that as we bring in this consideration of monoculture, I believe there's a need for labor even with the harvesting of cantaloupe. You will start to see this as we get later on into the present time, especially 2011 to 2000s. Hello? Okay. All right. So let me see what 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 slides. I have 4 slides. All right. So I'm going to bring you back over here a little bit so I can see you. Not that one. Not that one. This one. Okay. All right. So this is where I have you all go to what the sources are. So I showed you the little chapter. You can look at Professor Hernandez's. Again, he's the one that, be honest with you, he saw the class that's being advertised last May, and he was more than welcome to, hey, I'm talked about this. So I'll look at that. But then I want you to go, let's talk. I want to go and catch up with the labor part in regards to mostly after introduction of the melons and Rocky Ford, but then sugar beets, and need for, and what you've already read in Legacies of Dust, and that is 2 groups, right? Mexican nationals or Mexican Americans. You saw that in Legacies of Dust, but you also saw the Japanese immigration and how how they would work as labor also. We're going to bring these two groups to the table as
Professor, you're really cutting out.
I think I'm going to stop my sharing. Maybe that'll work. All right. So there's two things I want you guys to look at once we talk about this. So I'm catching you guys up for week 6 as far as Mexican nationals or Mexican Americans at the turn of the century and sugar beets, and then Japanese immigration. Okay, let me see, where do I got it? You've already read Legacies of Dust. All right, it briefly describes both considerations, but talks about the Bracero program. All right, and of course the Japanese to some extent. It doesn't really touch upon the Japanese too much before World War II. I have a link that's going on the slide, so I also put that in Zotero. It was an article done up by the Chieftain. It's on a website, and it was done up in 2019 and talked about the history of Japanese that came in after 1890 there in Arkansas Valley. I think by a certain turn of the century or so, overall there was a couple thousand, several hundred lived and worked on the farms in Arkansas Valley, specifically at Rocky Ford. All right. World War II would have a huge impact on them, of course, at the time, but also had an impact on Mexican nationals, Mexican Americans. So here's what I needed. So I'll show that. My other question is, are you guys still hear me? There we go. Let's just go ahead. You guys can still hear me. I'll try to bring my slides back up here. All right, let's just go with this right now. So Japanese immigration started after 1890, had a lot to do with the history of modern Japan and Japan's direct attempt to modernize. Most specifically, of course, it was in East Asia at the time, encroachment of European powers, but most especially by 1890, believe it or not, the U.S. By 1890, they were pretty much ending their samurais and brought in other reforms. That period of time, a little bit before, through 1890, was called the Meiji Restoration, M-E-I-J-I, Meiji Restoration, where they just put away the old traditional concepts of the feudalism and the samurai, and brought in the attempts to modernize their military. By 1890, they had freed up opportunities for them to actually immigrate outside of Japan to around Pacific Rim and the U.S., for example. And of course, the biggest area they did immigrate to is Hawaii, one of the first areas they immigrated to. And then, of course, the West Coast, primarily the West Coast. And this all had to do with their political and social changes. At the time, they even got to the point of looking at equal rights for women. Japanese women themselves were fighting for equal rights at a time then. So by 1890, so a lot of them immigrated at the time. Probably one more thing I would mention, of course, is at the time, they looked at their emperor in more reverent aspects in authority. So a lot of everything that they do now, the government is derived through some sort of hereditary and spiritual connection through the emperor, and the emperor being revered in such a manner. So the connection all this is connected. So you can culturally, religiously, like Confucianism, their outlook on the farming and the land changed in that way. So really what they did was in Rocky Ford brought that concept in, and really just their aspects of growing stuff and seeds and everything also changed, had a different outlook. So, all right, let me see what I got. All right, let me go ahead and talk about the Bracero program. Here's another link that I brought in. Now, this is something that could be, I always like connecting the cultural part. This is important. That way you have an idea. If I bring this in, I talk about writing, poetry, and the aspects of that, you'll see what I'm talking about. So the Bracero program here, how they look at, how this person looked at it in their thesis for Colorado State University in 2014 for their thesis in English, looks at how, for example, Woody Guthrie wrote a poem about a plane ride with some Mexican nationals coming in, and there were like 3 or 4 other American, Caucasian, and then they crashed, and the newspapers only put the names of the white Americans in the paper, and they called the dozen or so Mexicans nationals as deportees. Okay, and Woody Guthrie wrote a poem about it, and you can go in there and look at it. All right, I'm going to put this in Zotero. So here is where I kind of abruptly bring in the Bracero program. All right, initially here, and this one takes a good quick look at what we see as a problem as far as the racial attitudes. All right. I think I'm trying to connect, but so I'll put this on Zotero, but put the slides again up on Blackboard. You can take a look at this. You do not need to look at the whole thing. Look at what he's talking about in that poem. All right. These were the ones that came in because of the shortage of labor and the monoculture approach to farming and agriculture. So like, for example, sugar beets, and most specifically sugar beets, but also like cantaloupe. It's this concept of where water comes in is focused so much, even to the point, as you've already seen in other books we've read, to the point to where we hog so much water that Kansas starts to complain about it for good reason. Well, you go down to the river and you don't see any water in the river, and you're wondering how that happened. Well, we see how much water they sucked up in Rocky Ford, for example. How much towards the end of the 19th century, how much water was needed for cattle and the sheep and alfalfa, and then of course we bring in all aspects of different types of what could be grown there, like the cantaloupe and the melons, and then of course onions and sugar beets. All right. Okay, so what I'll do is where I'm bringing it to you guys as far as the later readings. Bracero program, the Mexican Americans, and then of course Japanese Americans. When we get to the 60s and 70s, here's where my, again, method to my madness is when we get to the 60s and 70s, well, let me back up. Sorry. Grenada, World War II, the incarceration of Japanese Americans, their placement of certain remote areas inland from the West Coast was one of the reasons where they were relocated, specifically for agriculture and labor towards or fulfilling a shortage in labor, specifically like sugar beets. In Grenada, they had 2,000 or 3,000 acres outside of where they lived in the built-up area, which was given to them. I shouldn't say given to them. That was the federal government bought off from the ranchers and farmers for them to farm. All right, and we'll see about that. That's where I'm going to go, and we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about Mexican Americans, and then of course Japanese Americans. So you've already seen a lot of this in Legacies of Dust. If you don't have that opportunity yet to look at it, then look at it within the aspect I just provided to you, whichever parts of Legacies of Dust towards the second half, and whatever I provide link-wise here. We'll start to go into it more, and then as we get closer to World War II, and then after World War II, and then we'll start to see how the conditions themselves for Mexican Americans in regards to their lives became a significant issue. You'll start to wonder why it didn't seem to be able to, even after World War II, or even after after they came back from war. It seems like that's what's going on. After they came back from war, especially like Japanese Americans who did fight in World War II for the U.S., where their actions and their actions to preserve freedom for the U.S. and just as they were in the military, treated better, quite frankly, equally to some aspects, came back home after World War II, veterans now, they go back to the area of where they came from, but they still they see and sense the discrimination. Okay, and both these groups suffered through the same thing like this, but specifically Mexican Americans, and specifically in like George Ottoby coming back from Vietnam, as with other veterans common to him, same group people, most veterans in general. That's Vietnam War. So you really see different aspects here, but again, let me get back to, so we're getting closer into the 20th century. So I want you guys to look at these two links. It's going to be an abrupt bang. Let's look at this catch-up period of Bracero program, Mexican Americans, and then of course Japanese Americans. And once we get focused to World War II, and afterwards, the labor part is going to come into play, and then we'll start looking at the Campo Mache. We'll look at a little bit other part that I've already brought to the table for you guys within labor and the sugar beets and Mexicans, Mexican nationals, Mexican Americans is La Colonia. Okay, that was in Lamar. I hope you've seen that already on Zotero and the links to it. That will touch upon how the sugar beet industry looked, about how they recruited labor and Mexican labor colonies, that's what they were called at the time, through the area there. So it's important to take a look at these, as you've seen it already for a couple of weeks, but understand how now, bring to you another concept, looking at the borderlands that's considered dynamic, different groups of people, diverse, all right? Diverse, but not as of inclusive. These are terms we use nowadays, right? We're trying to fight for, but still discrimination and how they try to snatch up and take control within their own agency and fight for equality. Let's see. So I kind of aspects of Dust Bowl. That's my last question to leave with you guys. And I want to go ahead and spend just a few minutes with some sort of discussion. And one of the things I wish to ask of you guys, and I understand this is really hard online, but is a little bit work here within the discussion from everyone. As we get to later on, I want to see a little bit more input. I not say it hasn't gotten better. I just, it's somewhere where I don't keep talking. And what was the impact of Dust Bowl within environmental history on labor? We read Legacies of Dust. What was the Dust Bowl's impact?
Well, there was a need for like really looking at soil conservation. And what I actually found interesting, and I forget where it was in the book, that early on, a lot of farmers actually didn't take it very seriously when looking at really how important it was to, do the soil conservation, if that makes sense.
Yes. So how come they didn't take it seriously? Anybody else? Why didn't I not take it serious? Remember what I said? What was the outlook of the Western settlers as they moved towards the West, imposing their will upon those who were already here, like specifically in southern Colorado, northern New Mexico? As a breakdown of the Western Great American Desert towards the later part of the 19th century. What was their attitude? That how would the rain come?
Rain would come if you plowed up the land.
Okay. How did this outlook look? Was most of the farming going on like where the Dust Bowl occurred?
Wasn't it the dry land farming?
Yes. Turning over the soil, it was turning over soil that had been already established within its ecological environment. Means grasses that were specifically grown naturally to sustain the land itself in order for that to continue to grow within the very aspect of low levels of annual rain and the kind of soil itself. But what were they doing, and what was the main cause of the Dust Bowl?
It was a lot of overworking the land and not, like you have different examples of too much cattle being on certain land, or just overusing that land. So then the topsoil kind of gave way, and then that led to the Dust Bowl.
Combined with
What's that?
which is what I have. Combined with drought, which happens frequently, it just was the perfect storm of bad decisions.
But wasn't where they originally it came in with the mystery or the myth? It's like the magic man or Rain Man. There were periods of a lot of rain, and that's how they thought they would come in. But to think that they would be able to bring more rain as they turned over the soil, put seed in, and stuff will come out, grasses, crops, and provide more rain. The concept of evaporation was different, and that's a lot of changes within, like you said, the people coming in from the federal government and extension services changed this outlook, right? But didn't change it soon enough, as you see, because the land all through there in the southeast portion of Colorado into the Panhandle and Oklahoma and Kansas, Nebraska, down into the northern part of Texas, millions of acres were turned over literally. Of course, the under part is sandy, so you see a little bit of the loam, clayey loam on the surface that has, you can. I think it's when you squeeze it, and if it still sticks to itself a little bit, that means it has the ability to have somewhat nutrients to grow the grasses and the crop, and has the ability to maintain its moisture, hold on to a little bit longer for the stuff on the vegetation to grow on the top, ability to grow. As you can see then with the arid environment, that's what was created over how many long, time immemorial. And then of course, if you go down further into the ground, it just becomes sand, and then you try to squeeze it and it just falls apart. And of course, no moisture it's just sand, you just go through. That's what happened. It just took about this much, or, turn it literally over, and where it's just the light, very sand, and the very, very light sand was on top and all over the Midwest. And as the wind blew and the droughts came in, and the locusts and the grasshoppers and the frogs, and, like the Moses and the plagues and all that, ancient Egypt, was able to pick up all that very light sand and got into the upper atmosphere practically. So really, let me finish off with, how do you think, at least with dry land farming or with labor, how did it impact the labor part? You see how Schieffelin wrote a little bit more into after World War II, the 50s and 60s and 70s. What did they do? What was their response, continued response, other than FDR's New Deal? What was that? More diversion of water, more diversion of Arkansas River, even bigger dam projects.
Right. And also they were changing the landscape. They were terracing the land so that it would hold on to the moisture a little bit better. So that's labor intensive. And then with the extra water that they're pulling out, they're introducing more labor intensive crops like the sugar beet.
Okay, yes. As after World War II I think I need to probably get into this, but how was the sugar beet industry after World War II?
Didn't it start to?
Did it plateau, or was it starting to decline?
Wasn't it starting to decline with the rise of cane sugar?
Okay, yes. We haven't really talked much about the global impact or implications on why, for example, sugar beets was grown. As you probably know, at least on the political, global, international scale, that the ability to grow and make money off of the sugar beets, again, a monoculture, one of the biggest traits of that monoculture is controlling the supply and demand. Where does the supply going to come from? So here, where do the sugar beets come from to fulfill that demand? We had to stop the sugar cane from somewhere else. And where was that? I think it was, in the Philippines, for example, Hawaii, other areas, Southeast in Asia, or even Europe. You get the seeds from, where does Swinka and where this other guy, who was the main guy that did all the experiments on the sugar beet seeds? Peter Magnus. All right. Where did he get the seeds from? Germany. So you bring in the seeds from Germany and you grow them down here in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas River Valley. But then in turn, you have your national government limit any sugar beets from Europe. All right, so there's the irony. So really, monoculture is absolute control of exports or imports, am I thinking right? Imports, all right? Agricultural imports. So you don't, or you stop it outright, or you control it with a tariff. So that's how they were ability for farmers to basically subsidize, right? To some degree. So there's that other monoculture aspect. Who has another connection to labor though? We're talking about who works and why you work and what particular groups were working. How is the Dust Bowl had a lingering impact after World War II, and that diversion of water. Would see that sugar beets are try to be subsidized, but you see it was on a decline. As you'll start to see later on is what I have you guys doing, looking at hemp, and eventually that will be seen as a monocultural item in regards to what is being handled and managed, organized for that to start growing, particularly dryland farming, as there are those within like Kiowa County who were growing, I think, a hemp seed, dryland farming, just in the last few years. All right, as opposed to growing of actual hemp to then for CBD oil, but then of course the need to go back out there as similar to sugar beets and for them to weed the weeds somehow, keep that separation. I don't know how exactly. That's something we got to look within the hemp analysis. All right. Anything else? Okay. So I kind of sort of caught you guys up with the to week 6, and we know that as we talked about the other day, the midterm is due on the 23rd. 23rd, probably by class time of that day. Okay. I need to see these, and by that time, the discussion response number 2 is due today. As far as tomorrow, Thursday, we'll get to we'll workshop this midterm again, or should we do any questions? This is where you gotta have to, okay, so I'm going to starting to, the acceleration of populating Zotero is going to increase with that, which I have for you really starting on, yeah, with the 60s and 70s, the Chicano movement, and the somewhere in aspect agriculture of Arkansas Valley and sugar beets, and see that decline, but continued. It was very slow declining, and it wasn't just sugar beets, and really it's going to. I'm going to start slapping that stuff on there. So this is week 6. You will see cantaloupes later. And we also be going to look at onions. Aspects of how, like we kind of touch base, literally kind of as what is required as far as with that labor in sugar beets. So everybody remember that. What aspects of labor is needed for sugar beets, other than the mechanized portion? The mechanized portion was the cultivation, the seeding, but what about during the growing season? What other aspects are we talking about?
There was like topping.
And what was topping for?
To keep them from going to seed.
Okay. And why is it important to not have it go to seed?
It's to maximize the sugar content.
Okay. What else?
They have to be thin. Actually, they have to be thin before they're topped.
Okay, so, all right, weeding. So they're weeding early summer, thinning to kind of keep each particular beet in the row separate so it can grow out enough, still maintaining that sugar content, but also be rugged enough for it to be pulled out of the field, put on the truck, and taken over to either the beet dump temporarily or to the factory. Okay. Handle all that. I mean, literally handling. You got to do a lot of handling, and the sugar beet's got to be tough enough to be able to sustain its, it's not going to turn into mush before it gets to the factory. Okay, so I had it in my mind just a second ago. For why am I talking? So we're going to talk about more manual stuff like this for onions too, and we're going to find out what's going on with hemp. Okay, your hemp analysis is going to. These are two areas you need to fit. Picture in your mind what you physically yourself got to do. It's with this, so that way you understand that labor part. Okay, here's what I have to tell you. I think that how long were they out there working? Let's talk about anybody. Then once they brought in sugar beets and they planted them, and you see what they had to do. What typical day do you think it looked like? Anybody? Don't matter. Just guess.
Probably from sun up to sundown.
Yes. 12 to 14 hours. That's right. So you look at that and then see what they did. The sugar beets, did you guys see the picture of with the topping? What did they use? Did they use, other than a hoe for the weeding or the thinning, what other tool did they use?
And a big knife for the topping.
Okay, what specifically kind of knife was it? Okay. Machete. Machete. It had a little prong on the end of it to pull out, so that then they used the blade to chop off the top part. Okay. Put it back. So La Colonia interviews, the documentary, let me tell you one more thing. The reason why I'm kind of holding out on ending is again, the sense of also where you guys are at other than here in the class. And so my sense is that, okay, so I'm not going to always, I will do my best, and I should be probably put it down as one of my, rules of the class to give you, who's not getting my announcements, make sure my announcements. I go on the Blackboard and whatever stuff I put up, I put in announcements. Everybody getting my announcements. So if I put stuff in the Zotero or on the Blackboard, on the course modules, shoot it out as a Blackboard announcement, or I shoot out an email directly. Okay, so a lot of these things are on the interviews for La Colonia, which will answer a lot of questions on what sugar beet industry did as far as bringing in that labor. Okay, establishment of actual colonies. Okay, you got to look at that stuff. I know there might be some internet issues, but I need to know. Make sure you guys go to Zotero, and also really get to Blackboard. So everything's connected to Blackboard and Zotero. Who's not on Zotero? I know I'm asking kind of rhetorical questions. Forgive me. I try not to. Okay. Yeah, I will. Let's see. No questions? I feel like I'm kind of ending the class a little bit awkwardly, but We'll get back to consider the catch up on Bracero program as we get to, let me try to contextualize. Let's see if, okay, who's still on the fence on what to do with the midterm? Statement, who's on the fence on deciding on what to do as far as either statement of need or statement of protest? Everybody good? Okay. All right. So by next week, I think I wanted to see if I can, everybody good with what environmental racism is, and who has looked at the Salt Creek interviews, looked at the history of Salt Creek. Okay. I've also put a little bit more stuff on that, on Zotero. Let me see. I don't have anything for you guys to read this week other than the midterm. All right. That's in consideration of the midterm. All right. And as you see how I'm looking at my old syllabus. What am I doing? Sorry. No. Okay. Week 7 is continued because I don't want to spend too much time on Zoom with the Salt Creek history and environmental racism. We kind of touched base on consideration of racism and then going with environmental racism. For that aspect of Salt Creek is relatively simple when you talk about water being contaminated. Class, this is not the only time you'll see considerations of water for residents. Once we get to Grenada here, all right. One more thing, okay? It's tough being online. I have a hard time gauging the overall feeling of the class as far as what I expect you guys as far as off the syllabus, and then of course while I'm online with you. And try to sense what questions you have. Yeah, you're gonna see this. You're gonna get to Grenada, Colorado. So some of you may have seen a little bit already and heard from me already about my concerns about Grenada. I could tell you that it's happening right now. It's this very moment. This very moment. Let's see. Oh, okay. I'll finish off with this, guys, and I thank you for your patience for the last few minutes. In regards to the statement of need or statement of protest, it's something that one other area I don't want to spend another 10, 15 minutes on another mini workshop, not trying to do that. I want to add an addendum real quick. An addendum. Let me stop the sharing here. Okay. An addendum to the mini workshop we talked about the other day as far as the statement of need, statement of protest, and how to, what context to provide or to use to make a decision on that. In regards to possibly distinguishing between those two is looking at statement of need particularly. It's just using all what you would probably do in a history class or all history majors particularly, or those within, I guess, education, is looking at just past stuff, primary sources, secondary sources, historical stuff, and making a decision that way, looking at stuff that's been in the past, distant past. All right. With the statement of protest, and a lot what you see probably within the Chicano movement, and it's something I can probably help you with, is with statement of protest would probably, and I believe you'll probably see this with Black Lives Matter, for example, taking what they see now, in the present, and say and using that and protesting a statement of protest. You've seen this already. Taking what just happened, something egregious and just outright wrong that just happened just recently, over the last few years, with the racism, particular groups of people, law enforcement agents, and just say, no, this is wrong. And they articulate it in that way. So using the present to impact or what you want to say. Here in this class, you get a choice somewhere. Most of what it is that you have, guess what? I kind of forced you to look at what is historical. All right. That is only the part I've have imbued upon you to some degree as your teacher within history. So that part, you enrolled, you had somewhat, yeah, okay, you accepted that part. Oh no, I now have some historical background. You could choose whether you'd like to reject it and just primarily focus on statement of protest and say, now, environmental racism is here. I want to talk about that over what has been put out on the internet and the blog and stuff like that. That's a good way of looking at it. I would expect by the midterm, though, you would probably take a little bit that given you historically and use it as your justification. But I think that's my addendum to that. I would still expect some sort of historical connection, but I think you'll see what many others have looked at, and I'm very present and just voice of dissent, so to speak.